I should introduce myself again. I'm Dominic Piper, editor of Australia's Paper and Gold Mining Journal, which you'll find in all of your delegate satchels, a full preview to the conference in the Paper magazine. So please have a read of that. I'll introduce our panelists for this opening session. To my immediate left, we have His Excellency Joe Tapera Mhishi, Ambassador of Zimbabwe to Australia. Joe, thank you for joining us. Next to Joe is Her Excellency Berenice Owen-Jones, Australian High Commissioner to Accra, and a list of other countries in the region, accreditation to a number of other countries in the region, I'm sure that you'll touch on shortly, Berenice. Next to Berenice is Apostolova, a partner at Clifford. And finally, to my extreme left, although I assume not politically, is Sherif Andrawes, Global Natural Resources and Energy Lead at BDO, and a long time. Sherif, how many years at Africa Down Under?
At least 15, probably more,
20 years of Africa Down Under, which is commendable to say the least. Yeah, exactly. You haven't aged a day. Well, thank you, everybody, for joining us. This is an interactive session. As you're seeing just there, the microphones will be roaming around. And so we would please, this is really based to, generated to encourage conversations and get the conversation started for the week. I know many people that I spoke to last night already had 100 ideas about what should be on the discussion table at this conference. And so really what we thought we would do is to try and capture some of those conversations early and help you guide your way through your week of meetings and discussions and set the agenda really for what's coming up in the next couple of days. In doing that, I'm going to start with you, Berenice, if that's okay, as the Australian government representative on our table, and the only one who's currently based in Africa, given Your Excellency, you're in Canberra at the moment. Really simply, Berenice, what are you expecting out of this conference? What are you expecting the major topics of conversation to be here?
Well, I've been attending mining in Durban, Africa Down Under for 6 years now. I can't claim 20 years, but I've seen how the conversation has evolved over the years. Topics like the critical role of mining in energy transition, the increased demand for critical minerals, and the growing importance of sustainable and ethical practices, ESG of course, but also the mining social license to operate. These are all key themes I've seen over the last few years. We're likely to hear more about it. In fact, we already have heard about it this morning. Digital acceleration is another one. You could describe all these trends as positive disruption, in that they present challenges, but also opportunities to future-proof the industry. The shift to renewable energy is a very good example of that. Obviously, it's driving unprecedented demand for critical minerals, which Africa is richly endowed with, but decarbonization also means greater upfront investment and costs for companies as they adopt their strategies to reduce greenhouse emissions. So there are costs there. So that really is the E in ESG. But there's also a focus on ESG more broadly, and we certainly saw that at Mining in Durban last year. You were there, Dominic? Yep. So that was a key focus. And as investors, in fact, prioritize companies with a positive impact, social impact, but also environmental impact. And Australian companies, I must say, are uniquely positioned to set the global standard and lead the way in responsible mining. And I see that every day in West Africa. I might get a chance to talk about that later. But we already heard about a couple of companies this morning that are doing just that. You hear a lot about the social license to operate and how companies can add enduring value to the communities in which they operate. And I would argue now that the social license to operate, it's not a new theme, but it's very much part of the DNA of mining companies, just like health and safety. So that's something we should be discussing at the conference. I mean, the fact is companies that fail to meet certain standards of governance face reputational and operational risks in often quite challenging operating environments, and I would argue even security risks. I want to mention very briefly another not so new trend that I'm seeing, certainly in my patch, and is likely to be topical at this conference, the resurgence, the so-called resurgence of resource nationalism. This time round, you could argue that it's driven more by economic imperatives rather than a political narrative, but that's still present. We've seen the emergence of new mining codes across the region, certainly across the sub-region of West Africa, and they're very similar in that they have a focus on greater regulatory control, increased taxes, and greater local content. What's slightly new is government's emphasis on value added in country and greater government ownership in some cases. Unfortunately, this sometimes comes with an increase in disputes or arbitration. I believe that actually that's a theme of one of the sessions at the conference. So these are really strong themes that I'm seeing in my patch, but also in general conversations with mining industry. There's also digital acceleration, but I think others are probably better qualified than me to talk about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Berenice. Ambassador Mhishi, as the Dean of the African Corps in Canberra, you have many of your colleagues here, and you have a big delegation from Zimbabwe in attendance here, led by Minister Chitando. What are your expectations as the ambassador of Zimbabwe and as an African leader in the Australian diplomatic community for an event like this, and particularly here in 2025?
Thank you. Thank you, Dominic. Well, maybe I want to start by addressing the subject of the Zimbabwean delegation here, which is quite sizable. And I would like to say, overall, you know, it speaks to the growing relevance of the ADU as a platform for interface between representatives of government, the chambers of mines, the investment boards or agencies from Africa, the various mining companies from Africa, and the Australian equivalent in terms of representatives of the Australian government, the representatives of some emerging and big Australian mining companies. So the ADU, as you heard in his opening remarks, Bill Repard did allude to the fact that we have restored the participation to the level where it was pre-COVID. And he's also did mention that we have new companies that are coming to the ADU for the first time. It is also in that context that we have new companies also from Zimbabwe that are coming to the ADU for the first time. It also speaks to the growing importance of the mining sector in Zimbabwe. The sector is, traditionally, it has always been agriculture that was the biggest contributor to the GDP of the country. But now mining is growing in importance to a point where it is going to be soon the key driver or the central driver of Zimbabwe's economic growth, contributing the greater part, towards the GDP of the country. It also speaks to the industrialization process underway in Zimbabwe. Mining is supplying the raw materials to the manufacturing sector, giving rise to an industry based on value addition. We have value addition across the whole mining chain, and the legislation is supporting that. So mining becomes very important. And in that regard is the fact that, Australians have shown their strength in the met sector, the mining, engineering, technology, and services sector. And we think that there's great scope for driving further the process in Zimbabwe. As you all have known, Zimbabwe is endowed with more than 60 different minerals recorded on planet Earth. And so we think with the expertise, the experience the Australians have, the technological advancement, the scope for driving further the development in Zimbabwe's mining sector that we're already witnessing. I think this also to a large extent applies to many jurisdictions in Africa, where now, as inspired by the new policy vision of the African Union, the subject of value addition across Africa, not only in the mining sector, but in many other sectors of the economy, has gained credence. And so we also see Australia, speaks the same language of value addition, and we think there's convergence in our aspirations. And as Zimbabwe and as the African continent, we think at a time when there's a question of, positioning in terms of supply chains in the world, in particular in the area of critical minerals, Africa, with its large endowment of critical minerals, stands well positioned to craft strategic partnership with Australia that could see Australia, addressing. I know at the moment, perhaps some colleagues from Africa would do well to know this. Australia is just embraced a policy of stockpiling of critical minerals. And Africa says we are there to play with you to add value to that vision that you have, and we can work together. In particular, if we can also address the subject of value addition in our respective jurisdictions. I think at this point I could say that.
Thank you very much. Sherif, can our two diplomatic representatives have given us a lot of food for thought immediately. I suppose you come from a slightly different perspective, a different stakeholder in the Africa Down Under conversation. I want to go back to your point. You said you've been coming to this conference for 15 or 20 years. Can I ask you, have the discussions around Australia's investment in Africa's natural resources sector, have they changed over that period of time?
They certainly have. I guess over that period, you've had periods where Africa's been at top of the list for Australia, and other times when it's not so much. But I think that at the moment, we're seeing a time when it very much is of interest, very much so. And for the reasons we've heard here. One of the constants that we see for all that period, nearly 20 years, is gold. Gold doesn't go away. Gold's a constant, and it will be for the foreseeable future. Australian investors love gold. Africa's got lots of it. It's one of the number one thing. I guess the change that's happened in terms of commodities, we talk about that first, is around energy transition. Came in and was very much a focus in terms of Australian companies looking to invest in energy transition minerals. And more recently, I think this year is going to be interesting, is that whilst that's not gone away, it's more about critical minerals for, let's call it geopolitical security. That's probably going to be the discussion. We're going to hear a lot more around the traps this year and probably for the next couple of years. I think that's probably one of the changes we're going to see.
Thanks, Sherif. I think that is a thorny issue we really need to get into in a lot more detail. But before we get there, I'm going to ask Kate to give us some contributions. I'm sure you will be touching on the issue of critical minerals investment and other aspects of geopolitical tensions. But before we dive all the way into that, it strikes me that the development of Australia's interest in Africa and the prospectivity and investment climate isn't a linear progression. But looking at 2025, you were here last year participating in the conference. Do we have a clearer picture for Africa Down Under 2025 about mining investment on the continent than we did in 2024?
That's a difficult question, Dominic. I think the answer is yes and no. It's not a straightforward answer. And I think that's it's a yes, because if you look at the numbers show increased investor confidence in the African markets. So 2024 saw the highest amount of foreign investment going to Africa, especially Northern Africa. There was a surge of 75% to the highest investment ever. So that shows investor confidence in the market. And as Paydirt has noted in some of your publications, the Africa-oriented, Africa-focused Australian mining companies, and especially the mid-tiers in the ASX, are the most well-performing companies in the ASX. So that, again, shows a clear picture of a lot of opportunities and a lot of growth in the region as well. At the same time, resource nationalism, what we have seen happen in some countries in Western Africa with expropriating assets, with drastic changes which increase uncertainty, and investors are facing more and more challenges. In certain jurisdictions, obviously it's not in the whole continent, but in certain jurisdictions there are more challenges. There are geopolitical risks, there's sovereign risk, there's regulatory risk, there's price volatility as well. And so I think ADU opens in the middle of that uncertainty and complexity as well. But I am hopeful, and I think that the benefit of ADU this year will be discussing those risks and discussing those issues and coming to a solution for some of those risks and addressing them effectively. And next year we can open with a more clear picture.
Yes, well, hopefully. And I think, Berenice, I'll come to you following on from Kate and for that matter, Sherif and Joe's point. The critical minerals dimension or frame adds a new dimension to the conversation here. Perhaps 15 years ago, the conversation about political risk and about investment was almost a bilateral discussion between Australian investment in African projects. But that, in the critical mineral space in particular, and in your region more widely in the gold space as well, it's become a lot more complicated, hasn't it? There's numerous players in the geopolitical space. How should we be thinking about that in our conversations this week? Berenice, yeah.
So specifically in West Africa?
Yeah, I think specifically, let's start specifically in West Africa, yeah.
Yeah, so I cover a good part of West Africa, 9 countries to be precise. West Africa is very dynamic in terms of mining. It has the largest known reserves of minerals. Australia's investment in the region, it's hard to put a precise figure on it, but I'd like to say about $30 billion. Australian companies are involved in really every aspect of the industry, from surveying, exploration, mine design, and construction, drilling and excavation. These companies play a significant role in the development of local economies, and in fact, in some countries, they're a complete game changer. I'm thinking specifically about Guinea, the mine in Simandou there, one of the largest untapped high-grade iron ore deposits in the world, and it's the largest greenfield integrated mining and infrastructure investment. So it's a joint venture involving Rio Tinto, and it is a nation-building project. So, and we'll hear more, by the way, from the delegation from Guinea. There's a minister. We should hear from them in session 2. We heard about gold. Yes, gold is a constant. Ghana used to be called the Gold Coast. So Ghana, a lot of mining for gold. There are 30 ASX listed companies in Ghana at the moment. But there's also plans underway for the first lithium mine. That's Atlantic Lithium, and Met's companies are very present as well. And you'll hear from the minister from Ghana tomorrow, I think. And you will also hear some very good success stories from Côte d'Ivoire. So touching on the geopolitics in the region, I would argue that West Africa has become a bit of a nexus for competition for resources. We're seeing competition to secure the supply chain for critical minerals, lithium in particular, and China at the moment has the upper hand given its advantages in processing. So the opportunities are there. Do I have time to talk about a few challenges?
Absolutely. Yes, yeah, please do.
So gold prices have been rising steadily. That wouldn't have escaped anyone's attention. Profits too, I guess, but also costs related to rising inflation and having to invest in sustainable practices. We've heard about, I mentioned the change of mining codes in West Africa. So many of these mining codes were drafted decades ago, and to be fair, they're no longer really matched community expectation or the pressures of a globalized market. So what is tricky is finding the right balance between what's a fair return for governments and what's a viable investment for companies, and that's quite a tricky balance to find. So I don't have the answer to that, but it seems to me that government, local communities, and companies need to work together to build that kind of trust and find the benefits and shared values without weakening industry competitiveness. And this is what I'm finding in my jurisdiction. That balance can be quite hard to find. The other uncertainty in my part of the world, unfortunately, is security and geopolitical risk. I'm thinking in particular about the Sahel, where increased resource nationalization is combined with a deepening security crisis. And yes, Burkina Faso, there has been tension in the mining company over arbitrary detention. And perhaps we'll hear more about that later. But I do want to say that at the Australian High Commission in Accra, we organise a yearly West Africa Mining Security Conference, WAMS for short. We've got one on the 30th of September, and it addresses the risks for mining companies in the region, how to mitigate the risks, what the security outlook is. It's very much an international conference with security practitioners, mining companies, think tanks, including Chatham House. So if you need more information, I can provide that and provide the program. So the government is intensely aware of some of the security and sovereign risks faced by companies in the region. That said, companies continue to operate in Mali and Burkina Faso. It could be a case of high risks, high rewards.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Ambassador Mhishi, you mentioned earlier some of the reasons why there's such a big Zimbabwean delegation here at the conference this week. What should Australian investors, there hasn't been a lot of Australian investment in Zimbabwe in recent years. What should the Australian investors read into Zimbabwe's commitment to this conference and commitment to coming to Australia to form partnerships with Australian companies and Australian investors?
Well, I mean, first and foremost, that speaks to Zimbabwe's current policy. One, that it is open to business, that it is ready to engage across the globe, to entrench partnerships with all jurisdictions without exception. Suffice to have mutually beneficial prospects of engaging in such business. And two, the lithium sector that has been spoken about by Berenice is it's a topical subject, and you may be aware, it's if you Google which country has got the biggest lithium resource on the African continent, the answer you'll get there. So that resource is not for us, it's a shared global resource, and from that perspective, the Zimbabwean delegation would like to engage. We have the hard rock lithium, which has been credited as one of those most efficient when it comes to, making either your lithium carbonate, your lithium hydroxide in terms of quality. You have that coming from there. And they also have we have representation here for those who are seeking partnership in platinum. There's a company here, platinum is very important. So they are here. We have a federation of miners in Zimbabwe. They're carrying a big asset in gold, which they're tabling here at the ADU. You have, of course, also the Zimbabwe Energy Regulatory Authority, led by the Minister of Energy here. They're looking for companies that have got the capacity to, come up with energy projects that can power the mining projects. As you understand, mining consumes quite a lot of energy. So the minister will be talking to various models they're open to. It could be your mini hydropower plants. You could be talking, now even in Zimbabwe, we are looking at small, nuclear reactors as one of the sources of power in our energy mix. Here also the coal that we've been talking about, yes, I know we're talking of a transition, but certainly I think for the foreseeable future, coal will be with us, and we have a big coal resource, a metallurgical coal we have, and we have a representative here who wants to engage on that. So just in a nutshell, we are saying we are open to business, and we have come up not only with the assets, but we've come up with the ministers who speak to the legislative environment that seeks to always striving to introduce legislation that matches the best practice in the world. And we say that's not a terminal point, but we continuously work on that. That's why we have the ministers here to address issues that may be of concern to any prospective investor in Zimbabwe. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I come back to, we spoke earlier about resource nationalism, and I whetted everybody's appetite by saying we'd come back to it in a more robust way. It has been a challenge in recent years, and it has been complicated by geopolitical events across the world. You mentioned earlier that it should be conversations that are taking place. Perhaps sometimes we're a little bit frightened to broach these subjects between investors and host governments and host communities. What's your advice to investors and indeed the government delegations here about broaching the topic of resource nationalism? Where should the conversation start?
I think my advice would be have those conversations, because as was already mentioned, it's a hard balance to strike. It's a hard balance between the country wanting to take control over its own natural resources, right? To maximize the benefits of its own natural resources for the local people, for its citizens. And that overall goal is not concerning in and of itself. What is concerning is how some governments have tried to achieve that goal and how they have tried to accomplish that goal. And that's through straight up expropriation of taking over assets, taking over a mine because it's a gold mine, it's in production. It's a good time to have a gold mine in production for the benefit of the government, for the benefit of individuals in the government as well. So that's what's concerning. And with recent developments in resource nationalism, what is also concerning is that some governments take more subtle and more indirect forms of that kind of nationalism and resource nationalism by trying to change fiscal terms in contracts that are already concluded between the company and the government. So if you have a contract that's signed that is being performed, it's not fair, it's not equitable to try to change the fiscal terms, to try to dramatically increase taxes from 5% to 25% without having that conversation and trying to come up with a compromise. Another unfair thing that some governments try to indirectly do as well is try to significantly increase state ownership of mines. And again, some governments do that after there's exploration, after there's a discovery, a significant discovery, and it's an opportune time to try to get more out of that mine. Regulatory risk as well, changing regulations, limiting the export of minerals outside of the country to make sure that there is in-country processing, and sometimes discriminatory measures as well. So we talked about geopolitics. We talked about how certain countries want to get more friendly with other countries, so they favor foreign companies from those countries, but other foreign companies are being targeted and being revoked licenses because of opportunities, geopolitical tensions as well. So it's those kinds of concerns that I think we just need to talk about and we need to address as well, and discussing, you know, with Australian mining companies how to mitigate that kind of risk and that kind of uncertainty that investors don't like. And it comes again back to funding as well, right? Investors like certainty. Money flows where there is certainty. And if you have that kind of geopolitical risk, increased geopolitical risk, and increased regulatory risk and uncertainty, there is less funding potentially to be had to develop that mine. And one tool that I always talk to my clients about effectively addressing geopolitical risk is bilateral investment treaties. Those are agreements between countries which guarantee certain protections to investors from one country into the other country. So if you're a mining company and when a potential investor asks you, well, how do you address sovereign risk? How do you address geopolitical risk? You can have a clear and straightforward answer and say, through bilateral investment treaties. And bilateral investment treaties are also important because they actually directly help with funding. So they help with debt financing. So bankers give larger loans when you have a mine that's protected through a bilateral investment treaty. Studies show that 20% larger loans is what you get from being protected. You get better interest rate in those loans, so lower interest rate on your loan. You get no collateral sometimes, so you don't have to attach an asset to the loan, and you get less restrictive covenants as well, so less obligations for you to do when you use the money from the loan. So those are direct benefits from bilateral investment treaties. And another benefit, I think, that a lot of companies don't appreciate, and which helps being part of that conversation with countries about the changes that countries want to implement, is having those bilateral investment treaties as negotiation leverage. So when companies go to a foreign country, you give up all the power you have. You're at the hands of governments, which is fine, but unless there are drastic changes that you're not communicated about, you're not part of the conversation, and unless you have that protection, you have to sit back and quietly accept those changes. But if you have that protection, bilateral investment treaty protection, you can be part of that conversation. You can have an input that governments take into account. And when my clients have used their bilateral investment treaty protection without starting arbitration, without even threatening arbitration, but just saying, by the way, you can't just do anything. You have certain obligations you have given us certain guarantees that you have to follow. It's helpful for countries to have that conversation with you. It's helpful for you to take some of that power back and be part of that conversation, because obviously countries want that foreign capital, right? Countries want the foreign expertise, they want the foreign capital, and they also want World Bank loans. And the World Bank has a policy that says if you don't negotiate in good faith with investors when there are issues of expropriation, we might not give you loans going forward. So it's a powerful tool to force yourself into the conversation if you're not getting the feedback that you want to get. But I think what is important is to have those conversations, and they're difficult conversations, and I struggle to be the buzzkill in ADU, but they're important to have, I believe.
Thank you, Kate. And don't worry, you will never be a buzzkill. We'll always bring the positivity back around at some point. I'm going to open the floor up to a couple of questions. Have we got our colleagues with the roving microphones? We just have one. Paula, down here. This one first. Sorry.
Thank you. My name is Elias Munsha. I'm High Commissioner for Zambia. And thank you very much for the contributions that have come from the panel and my colleague, Dean of the African Diplomatic Corps in Canberra, and several of our colleagues. Now, Kate, if I got you very right, you mentioned about the issues of sovereign risk and the importance of bilateral treaties. I do think that I would be speaking on behalf of my friends here, or my colleagues, and indeed most of our governments, is that African governments are committed to these bilateral treaties with Australia. And so we are working to see that there is interest in both African countries and Australia so that we can move these bilateral treaties forward. And it's very important for us to be hearing that from businesses like you, but I believe that even at governmental level, there should be equally that commitment to see that Australia does have those high-level talks with African governments, with us as representatives of our African governments, so that we can move towards that protection. If Australian companies are looking for these kind of protections, then Africa and its governments are ready to be able to provide that so that we can work together to reduce on all those risks. And that's why we are investing our time and our attention to move along our colleagues, both at the federal government here in Australia, so that we can be having more meetings and more interactions between our government representatives and ministers when they visit Australia, so that industry can see that there is that political collaboration, and then we believe that with that visibility of political collaboration, there will be business interest as well. The second matter I think that you raised is in terms of how risk is analyzed. Sometimes there is a feeling that Africa is judged much more harshly than other regions in terms of calculation of risk or sovereign risk. And sometimes the idea that money flows where there is peace, where everything is good and there is regulatory consistency and things like that are betrayed by what we see happening in reality. Because some of the investments that go to Europe might contradict the very ideas that some regions are much more consistent than Africa is. But on the other hand, we do have a lot other jurisdictions in Africa that are very safe, no civil war, regulatory consistency, political stability, wonderful people, good nature, lots of animals to see, and lots of good people to interact with. And yet we get treated to these conversations that we still must do more in order for us to attract our businesses and investments. And yet there are so many regions that are ready, they are open, they are consistent. And I think we may have to change that language and that focus to say that indeed out of the 54 countries, maybe 4 countries may be troublesome, but there are 50 other countries that have been consistent, very similar as Australia in terms of the legal systems. Some of them were former British protectorates or colonies, very similar language. similar justice systems, similar court systems. Most of the statutes themselves are very similar. And so there is a lot of good thing happening in Africa. And I think we must maintain that language, maintain those ideas that Africa is indeed very, very peaceful and ready. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. And I know Brendan Harris, who spoke earlier on, Managing Director of Sandfire, in the interview that we have in the magazine, you mentioned this very concept of what is thought of as a Tier 1 sovereign risk jurisdiction has changed a lot over the last 10 years and continues to change. And so applying that prism of what was a Tier 1 sovereign risk jurisdiction 10 years ago or 15 years ago may not apply in exactly the same way as it did. I'm paraphrasing you there, Brendan, but I'm not taking you out of context, I hope. Thank you. We have got another question here. We've only got a few minutes left, so.
Okay. Thank you very much for the opportunity. I'm just curious. You need to understand first that Africa is at an infant stage in mining. We don't know that much at this point. We're learning. So Africa is afraid to be taken advantage of, especially the people. Because people have proved themselves to be taking one mineral and another without explaining the other one. And this is where you feel that taxes get raised. But it's on the other mineral. To be honest, miners are not the most honest people in the world, regardless of where they come from. So we take precaution, we are scared, and we understand that the political shift in such money moving around, we have seen people receiving billions. It could affect our political stability. We need to be sure what we are doing. Now, we attend such meetings. Nobody is teaching Africans how to mine. We just discuss on how to bring investors. We don't discuss on joint ventures with African partners, just how to hand over. When we hand over, we might not be knowledgeable on the product. Thus, in the future, when we find out more, we might change. That might look like a disadvantage to you, but it's a disadvantage to us at that point in time. So be considerate, be open to us, and we will respond positively. But you have an advantage. You've been in this industry for hundreds of years. We're just starting now. You can't compare us. Just a girl that's reached maturity, she could get married, but she's not making the right decision, still a child. So bear this in mind, please. Don't be too harsh on us.
Thank you. We've got one here and then one more there. I think you'll find that there's many conversations coming up in the next couple of days about partnerships, about financing partnerships, about local content and about building environments. I know Brendan discussed it earlier on as well, about building local enterprise, local opportunities for localization of skills, upskilling, local businesses, supply chains and that sort of thing. So I think you'll find a number of conversations this week on that very subject. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. My name is Festum Sonda and I'm from Zambia, from a company ZCCM IH. And I think it's interesting to listen from the panel. Really, almost you are near being candid. I could tell when you talk about the risk of geopolitics. It's also good to see my elder brother here speaking on the opportunities in Africa. To me, I pick it from where Africa Nanda has been successful over the years. But I see that we are having this conversation maybe only in Perth. I think Africa Nanda has come mature. It's one thing I would like to suggest that maybe we take some seminars to revolve. You see, it's about trust in Africa. Okay, sometimes what the neighbor, we know the success stories that has come out of here, investment into abusing trust. But imagine having Africa Under hosted, maybe within a region in Africa, where we can even pull the heads of state to come. You know, everything's about trust. I think Africa Down Under has come of age now that you could come into Africa. We pull regional presidents so that we can even visit success stories. Everything, my brother, I understand the sentiments, but everything is trust. we cannot say nothing good has come out of it. There is something good has come out and is here to be touched, to be seen. Those are the success stories we can build up, because if we go in the regional, we host this in Africa, even those doubting Thomases could be pulled through and they see the success stories. And I think you should also open up mining tourism so that us in Africa can visit these success stories either in Botswana. I don't just have to visit in Zimbabwe to see how lithium. By the way, the gold sector, for example, is pulling very well in Zimbabwe and other African countries. We would like to learn those, just as you see. You see, for our animals, everyone knows, by the way, through geography, everyone knows that we are good lions, but if you want to see lions, you have to go to the country of the lion, isn't it? So if you have to talk about copper, go to the countries where the elephant and copper is. So this is my suggestion. It answers a lot of those hidden mischiefs, I would suggest. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We've got time for one more. I was going to say one more question, but I think I'm just going to say one more comment because I can see there's very few questions so far. But that's fine.
Hi, my name is Samuel Otu. I'm from the African Development Bank, and I'm very happy to be here. Kate, I would like to make a comment on something you said. I'm not very sure I understood you well, but we at the bank, we are now moving from just resource extraction to value addition. And we will keep insisting on having that value addition done locally, because that is how we learn, and that is how we build value. And I'm not sure whether you see that as being part of political risk or geopolitical risk. But we cannot continue to just do resource extraction without adding value. I just wanted to make that clear. All the various projects that we will finance going forward should have a component of value addition done domestically. And that will not be a risk. That is how we in Africa want to support our industrialization and move the masses out of poverty. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your comment. And I think all of the comments that we've just had from the floor and also from our panelists wrap up a lot of the conversations we'll be having both on the stage here. We'll be having panel discussions on local content and promoting local economies. We'll be having discussions on critical minerals and the opportunity for value addition. We'll be having discussions on the challenges of infrastructure on the continent and enabling infrastructure on the continent. We'll be having discussions about political risk arbitration and discussions around licenses and other ESG and financing discussions as well. But I think after an intense opening session, I think we've earned ourselves a cup of tea. So I think what we'll do, we'll call an end to proceedings there for the first session. So if you could just join me in thanking our four panelists.